August of 1989. My father had just arrived home from work, and I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework. My mother was cooking dinner, and Stephanie was practicing her dance for an upcoming school play. She was going to be a ballerina and had 3 weeks to learn a few simple spins and twirls. She had been diligently practicing over the past few days, but she just couldn't get it right. She was young and her temper was getting the better of her. And that's when Tommy decided to help her. He had been sitting on the couch watching her when suddenly he rose and stood behind my sister, placing his hands gently over her shoulders.
"Let me help, sweetie,"
he cooed, his voice carrying a cheerful note. My mother spun around from the stove, and I saw her visibly tense. She didn't like Tommy touching us. She gripped the wooden spoon in her hand until her knuckles went white, watching as Tommy crouched and cupped Stephanie's body with his. He took her hands in his from behind and guided her arms and waist, his cheek pressing gently against my sister. "Tommy, let her learn on her own," my mother said, her voice shaking. Tommy didn't even look at her, just kept guiding my sister. I could hear my father coming down the stairs, freshly changed from a day at the office. Tommy spun my sister, and for the first time, she nailed the twirl, her little feet twisting her body in a complete circle. Tommy clapped his hands once and then leaned down and kissed Stephanie on the cheek.
"Good girl."
"Don't do that,"
my mother shrieked, dropping the spoon, her face draining of blood. I jumped in my seat at the table and swallowed hard. I didn't know why my mum was getting so upset. I mean, he was just helping her. I also knew, deep down, that it was a bad idea to yell at the new member of our family. It was the gut instinct of a child, a gentle warning that rumbled in my head. Tommy stood. My father was standing at the foot of the stairs now, frozen, unsure of what to make of the confrontation.
"Megan, what's wrong?"
he asked. My mother's eyes never left Tommy.
"Spence, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is all right. We know what this monster is. We know what he did to our town all those years ago. I want him out of our house."
My father's eyes went wide, panic blooming in his face. "Megan!" He licked his lips, eyes darting back and forth at all of us.
"Don't be rude. Tommy has been a big help."
My mum grit her teeth.
"Stop that. Stop pretending we want him here. I can't watch this happen. I want him out."
Very slowly, Tommy walked into the kitchen and stood in front of my mother. He looked down at her, his perfect blue eyes shining like crystal moons. His voice was like frozen silk.
"Megan, would you come down into the basement with me? I need to have a few words with you."
My mother took a step back.
"Get away from me. Get away from my family. You're not welcome here anymore."
She turned desperate eyes to my father.
"Spence, do something."
My dad raised his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I could see that he was terrified. Stephanie was watching from the living room, her lip quivering, her eyes watering. I suddenly wanted to go and comfort her, but I felt glued to my chair.
"Come on now, Megan. Just a quick word."
"Fuck you,"
my mother spat. I gasped, heart dropping into my stomach. I had never heard my mother swear before, and it scared me stiff. Suddenly, Tommy grabbed my mother by the back of the neck, the smile never leaving his face, and yanked her to the basement door.
"Spence, stop him! Help me!"
My mother screamed, helplessly, trying to remove Tommy's iron grip from her. Tommy shot my dad a look that froze him where he stood.
"I'm sorry, Megan. We need to do what he says,"
he cried. Stephanie was now openly crying, her hands at her sides, tears running down her face. I felt sick as I watched Tommy open the basement door and drag my mother down into the darkness. The door slammed closed behind him. It was silent for a few minutes, and then the screams began. I had never heard my mother scream before, and the sound of it shattered me. My father ran into the kitchen and scooped me up into his arms, then snatched up Stephanie and his other one. He marched us upstairs into his bedroom and dumped us on the bed. We sat huddled like that for hours, none of us speaking a word. My mother continued to scream. Finally, long after the sun set, we heard the basement door open.
"Mum's sleeping in the basement tonight,"
Tommy called out. Two years passed, and it was now March of 1991. After that night, my mother never resisted or talked back to Tommy again. When she came out of the basement the following morning, I expected to see her covered in bruises and blood, but I could see no visible signs of violence. I was too young to understand what had happened, why my mother now walked with a limp and would for the rest of her life. She didn't speak to my father for a month, and even then, it was just enough to get by on. I noticed my father crying a lot during those 2 years. I didn't know what was happening to my family, but I kept my mouth shut and obeyed the rules. Listen to Tommy and don't talk about Tommy to others. Things went calm during those 2 years. Tommy continued to give us life lessons and be part of our home. No one but my family knew that he was living with us. He was our secret, the dark star that hung above our heads. I learned to smile around Tommy, as did my sister. If he thought that we were happy, he seemed more relaxed. But that night that my mother challenged him, that changed something. Every couple of months, Tommy would assert his authority over my parents. He would test them, stretch the limits of their patience and nerves. Most of the time, my father and mother would humbly submit to whatever mind game he played with them. Most of the time, he would do or say something to Stephanie or myself. It always made me uncomfortable too. Sometimes he would have us sit on his lap while he stroked our hair. Sometimes he'd sing strange songs to my sister about love. Sometimes he would make us take a bath together while he watched. I always put on a brave face during these times. Stephanie was young still, so she wasn't as bothered as I was. It was uncomfortable though, and I would look to my parents for guidance. With pale faces, they'd nod silently, and I'd continue in whatever activity we were forced into doing. It was in the early part of 1991 when the next awful thing happened to my family. Tommy pushed the limits once again. I rubbed sleep from my eyes and looked at my race car clock on the wall. The glow-in-the-dark hands read 2 a.m. I could hear something in the hallway outside of my room. It sounded like someone crying. Where was Tommy? I checked the dark corners of my room to make sure that he wasn't there, watching me sleep. When I was assured that he wasn't, I pulled the covers away and slipped to the floor. I crept to my door and looked out into the darkness. I could see a figure sitting on the floor by my sister's closed door. A person. I squinted in the black and realized that it was my father, with his hands over his face. He was sobbing, his back against the wall. "Dad?" I whispered. My father looked up and immediately shooed me back into my room. I just stood there as my eyes adjusted to the night. My father's face was a mess of blood and bruises.
"Go back to bed, Matt, please,"
he cried. I took a hesitant step out into the hallway.
Dad? What happened to your face? What's going on? Did Tommy do that?
My father's eyes went wide and he shushed me.
No, of course not. Don't say such things. Tommy's he's here to help us to be a better family, okay?
I walked closer to my dad and froze as I passed my sister's door. I could hear muffled cries from inside. I could hear fear.
Dad?
I whispered, pointing to the door.
What's wrong with Steph?
My father wiped a trail of blood from his lips, eyes watering, anguish stretching his features.
Come here, Matt.
I crawled into his outstretched arms as something loud banged against the wall from my sister's room. I jumped and my father curled me up into his chest. I could feel tears drip onto my head as he fought back misery.
Tommy's in there, isn't he?
I said quietly. My dad sniffled.
Yes, son.
I looked up into his bloody face.
What did you do, Dad?
My dad tried to smile, but his face wouldn't cooperate.
He wanted to do something with your sister that I didn't like. I told him no.
As he spoke, I realized that I could hear my mother crying from the bedroom. My dad cupped his hand under my chin.
We can't say no to Tommy, okay? Remember that.
All of a sudden, my sister screamed from her bedroom, a shrill piercing cry that shook me to my soul. I gripped my father's arm.
Why is he here?
I whispered.
Why can't he just go away?
My father was silent for a moment, and then he lowered his mouth to my ear.
Listen to me, Matt. This is really important. When you grow up, do not have children. He follows those with children.
I shifted my father's arms as something was dragged across the hardwood floor from the other side of the wall. My father grit his teeth, more tears spilling.
We don't know who he is or what he is. He came to our town when we were little boys and girls, just like you and Stephanie. Your mother and I lived 2 houses down from one another. Tommy infested our street. I don't know how. He was everywhere, always. He'd be at my house, but also across the street, and also at your mother's, all at the same time. I don't know what he wants, what his purpose is. He just showed up one day. He just showed up and wouldn't go away. God knows my father tried. Is that how Grandpa died?
I asked. I had never met my grandpa. I just knew that he died years before I was born. My father nodded.
Yes, Matt. Tommy had to teach him a lesson. He had to teach the entire street a lesson. After that, why can't you just kill him?
I whispered, ever so softly. My dad brought his mouth closer to my ear, his voice barely audible. We tried everything. We burned him, shot him, and cut him into pieces. But it never worked. He always came back, knocking at our door. And someone had to pay every time. Someone always had to pay. If we didn't follow his rules, someone had to pay. Tommy was our secret. He was our invisible monster, hidden from the outside world. Deaths were covered up. Abuse was brushed under the rug. Because we knew if anyone said a word, Tommy would make it bad for whoever had to face his punishment. I digested all of this with the understanding of an 8-year-old, and the only thing that I could say was, "When is he going away, though?" My father kissed me on the top of my head. 3 more years. The bedroom door suddenly opened, and my father jumped, tumbling me out of his arms. Tommy stood in the darkness, his face perfectly composed, except he was breathing hard. His plastic-looking face scared me, his two blue eyes glowing out of the black. Tommy jabbed a thumb over his shoulder at the now silent bedroom.
She's going to sleep like a log tonight.
It was now September of 1993, and we had 1 year left. 1 more year. I could almost see the desperation in my parents' eyes grow every day, begging the calendar to advance. We were almost through this nightmare. I thought a lot about what my father had told me that horrible night in the hallway. I thought about what he must have gone through as a child, what he must have experienced. I wondered how bad things must have gotten for Tommy to murder my grandfather. I realized now that despite all the awful things that Tommy was doing, my father's submission was keeping us alive. His agonized silence kept Tommy's wrath at bay. Looking back, I can't imagine the mental torture he endured during those 5 years. Stephanie didn't talk much after that night in March. I noticed her charismatic personality decline drastically, and suddenly she was an unsmiling, silent child. I don't think she understood what happened to her, and as she grew up, I think her mind slowly began to build a wall, blocking that night out from her mind's eye. My mother and father seemed to be extra complacent that last year too. They engaged in Tommy's nighttime lessons with added enthusiasm, and my mother desperately made sure that Stephanie and I reacted in ways that made Tommy happy. But I didn't make it out unscathed. Tommy was sure to make his mark on our entire family.